You wake at similar times, you follow familiar habits, you think about problems using the same mental frameworks you've used for years. You interact with people in ways that match the role you believe you occupy in their lives. Even your goals are shaped by ideas you accepted long ago. At first, these patterns help tremendously. They simplify life. Instead of analyzing every decision from scratch, your mind uses existing structures to move quickly and efficiently. Routines feel comfortable because they reduce uncertainty and create the illusion that life is under control. Predictability gives your nervous system a sense of safety. When you know what tomorrow will probably look like, your mind relaxes. When your identity feels clear and stable, moving through the world becomes easier. You know who you are, what you do, what's expected of you. But there's another side to this process, one most people never notice. The same structures that helped you survive can quietly transform into limitations on how far you're allowed to grow. A routine that once created discipline slowly becomes mindless repetition. Habits that once generated progress become automatic behaviors you follow without questioning. The identity you built to navigate life becomes a fixed story about who you're allowed to be. At some point, the structure stops evolving. When that happens, life may still look stable from the outside, but growth slows to a crawl underneath. This is why many people reach a moment where everything appears normal. They still follow their routines, perform their responsibilities, appear successful or stable to others. Yet something inside feels stuck. Not dramatically stuck, but quietly restricted. It feels like replaying the same pattern endlessly without moving into anything new. Days blend together. Goals that once excited you feel mechanical. Even achievements lose meaning because they no longer expand who you are. The strange part is nothing seems obviously wrong. Your life might still be functioning exactly as designed, but that design itself has become the limitation. Structures that don't evolve eventually stop supporting transformation. When stability becomes too rigid, it no longer protects growth, it contains it. This is why stability can slowly transform into something resembling a hidden cage. Not a cage made of visible barriers, but one constructed from familiar patterns, the same thoughts repeated daily, the same choices made automatically, the same identity maintained simply because it feels safer than exploring something new. Inside that structure, life remains predictable. But the cost of that predictability is that the system rarely changes in any meaningful way. And a quantum leap cannot happen inside a cage of perfect stability. In quantum physics, particles don't move between energy levels gradually. They don't slowly slide from one state to another. Instead, they remain in one stable state for a period, then suddenly jump to a completely different level. There's no visible transition between the two. One moment the particle exists in its current state. The next moment it appears in a new state with higher energy. That sudden movement is a quantum leap. What makes this fascinating is that the jump doesn't happen randomly. The system must first reach a specific condition. Energy builds up inside. Pressure increases. The structure that held the particle in place begins losing stability. For a while, everything might look normal, but internally, something crucial is changing. The system approaches what scientists call a critical point, the moment where the current state can no longer remain stable. Once that threshold is crossed, the particle cannot stay where it was. It jumps not slowly, not gradually, but instantly into a new configuration. This pattern appears in life itself. Think about moments when major changes happened in your life. Very often, the transformation didn't occur smoothly, and it means allowing the natural instability that appears during transition without rushing to eliminate it immediately. Uncertainty isn't the enemy of transformation. It's the environment in which transformation becomes possible. Just as a seed must remain in the soil before it can grow, the mind must sometimes remain in uncertainty long enough for new patterns to form. Many people never experience the leap because the moment instability appears, they interpret it as a sign that something is wrong. They immediately try to restore the previous state of comfort, but doing so keeps them inside the same structure that the transition is trying to move beyond. The people who reach the leap aren't necessarily those who suffer less instability. They're the ones who can tolerate the uncertainty long enough for the new structure to emerge. Intelligence or effort. It's attachment to your current identity. Without realizing it, many people aren't protecting their future, they're protecting the version of themselves they've already built. This identity becomes something held onto tightly, even when it quietly limits the direction life could take. Identity isn't something you're born with fully formed. It's something you build over time through experience, repetition, and interpretation. As life unfolds, you create stories about who you are. You describe yourself through roles, through past successes and failures, through beliefs you adopt and expectations you learn to live by. Someone might say, "I'm the responsible one," or "I'm the quiet one," or "I'm the person who never takes big risks." These statements seem simple, but they become powerful internal rules shaping how you think and act. Over time, these stories harden into a structure that feels permanent. Part of this identity is built through roles you occupy. You may see yourself as the provider, the caretaker, the expert, the creative thinker, the problem solver. These roles help organize decisions and give life a sense of direction. They also create consistency in how others see you. When people expect you to behave a certain way, continuing to play the same role becomes easier than redefining yourself. Slowly, the role becomes the identity. What began as a flexible description becomes a fixed boundary. Another layer comes from successes. When something works in the past, you naturally try to repeat it. If a particular mindset, strategy, or behavior once led to approval, achievement, or security, you begin relying on it. The success becomes proof that this is who I am, but the world constantly changes. What worked in one phase of life may not work in the next, yet the identity built around that success remains. Instead of adapting freely, you begin protecting the strategy that once defined you. Beliefs also shape identity. Over time, you collect beliefs about your abilities, your limits, the kinds of outcomes you deserve. Some are empowering, but many are quietly restrictive. You may believe you're not creative, not confident, not capable of leading, not meant for something bigger. These beliefs often originate from small moments in the past, a comment, a failure, a comparison, and then slowly become part of the story you repeat to yourself. Eventually, the belief stops feeling like an assumption and starts feeling like a fact. Expectations add another layer. Families, cultures, and environments create expectations about what kind of life you should live and what kind of person you should become. Sometimes these help guide you, but other times they trap you in identities that no longer fit. You continue performing the same version of yourself because it's familiar to others, even when internally you feel something shifting. The problem is that identity is designed to preserve stability. Once a certain version of yourself becomes established, your mind begins protecting it automatically. Every decision, every interpretation of events, every emotional reaction starts aligning with that identity. This is why real transformation feels so uncomfortable. A quantum leap often requires becoming someone different from the version you've been protecting. At a certain point, the identity that once helped you navigate the world can become outdated. It was built for a previous chapter of your life, not the next one trying to emerge. Yet letting go feels risky because identity provides psychological safety. It answers the question of who you are and how you fit into the world. Without it, things feel uncertain. This is where many people stop. They sense that something new is possible, but the leap requires releasing the identity that has defined them for years. Before transformation happens, there's usually a moment that feels deeply uncomfortable. It's the stage where the identity you've lived with for years starts feeling wrong. Not completely broken, not completely useless, but somehow misaligned with who you're becoming. The routines that once energized you begin feeling empty. The goals that once pushed you forward stop creating the same excitement. Things that used to make perfect sense start feeling strangely distant. At first, this shift is subtle. You may not even recognize it as the beginning of change. It just feels like something inside you is no longer working the way it used to. As this continues, motivation begins fading in unexpected places. Activities that once gave you direction begin feeling mechanical, almost like you're following a script written for a previous version of yourself. You may still complete the same tasks, maintain the same responsibilities, show the same outward behavior, but internally something has shifted. The energy behind those actions is gone. What once felt meaningful now feels repetitive. This is the stage where questioning begins. You start asking deeper questions about your life, your choices, your direction, why certain paths no longer feel right, why achievements that once mattered so much now feel strangely quiet. Sometimes these questions appear suddenly, almost without warning. Other times they build slowly over months or years. Either way, the mind begins searching for answers because the identity that once provided certainty is no longer holding everything together. During this phase, many people experience powerful confusion. It can feel like standing between two versions of yourself without fully belonging to either one. The old identity no longer feels authentic, but the new one hasn't yet fully formed. This in-between space can be deeply unsettling because human beings naturally prefer clarity and direction. When those disappear, the mind interprets the situation as a problem needing immediate fixing. Along with confusion comes a sense of losing direction. The goals that once structured your future may no longer feel meaningful. Plans that once seemed obvious now appear uncertain. You might find yourself hesitating more often, second-guessing decisions that previously felt automatic. This loss of direction is often mistaken for failure or weakness, but in reality it's simply the mind adjusting to the disappearance of an identity that once guided behavior. Emotionally, this stage can feel chaotic. People often describe waves of frustration, restlessness, doubt, even unexpected sadness. It can feel like parts of your life are dissolving without clear explanation. Relationships, ambitions, and priorities may all start shifting at the same time. Because identity connects so many areas of life, when it begins loosening, the emotional system responds strongly. What feels like chaos is often just the mind trying to reorganize itself around a new structure that hasn't yet appeared. The important thing to understand is that this stage isn't the end of stability, it's the beginning of change. Just like in a quantum system, the moment before a jump is often when the system becomes unstable. The old state can no longer hold itself together, but the new state hasn't yet fully emerged. This instability isn't a mistake in the process, it is the process itself. When identity begins collapsing, it creates the space necessary for something new to form. Without that collapse, transformation would never happen because the old structure would continue maintaining itself. What feels like confusion is often the mind releasing an outdated definition of who you are. What feels like loss of direction is often the removal of paths that no longer belong to your future. The emotional turbulence that appears before a breakthrough isn't evidence that you're moving in the wrong direction. It's often evidence that the internal structure of your life is preparing for a shift. When the old identity begins weakening and direction becomes unclear, most people don't immediately accept the process. Instead, they enter the resistance phase. This stage is common because the human mind naturally tries to protect stability. When something threatens the structure that once made life predictable, the mind reacts by trying to restore control as quickly as possible. It doesn't understand that the instability is part of transformation. From its perspective, something is going wrong, and the safest solution seems to be returning to what once worked. One of the first signs of resistance is overthinking. The mind begins analyzing everything in an attempt to find a clear answer. Every decision feels heavy. Every possibility is examined again and again. You replay conversations, rethink past choices, imagine multiple future outcomes, hoping one will restore certainty. Overthinking creates the feeling of movement, but in reality it often keeps you in the same place. The mind becomes trapped in analysis because it believes that if it thinks long enough, it can rebuild the stability that's slowly disappearing. Fear also appears during this stage. When identity starts shifting, the brain interprets the change as a potential threat. The familiar structure that once defined who you were is no longer reliable, and the future version of yourself hasn't fully formed yet. This gap between old and new can feel dangerous to the mind because uncertainty triggers protective instincts. Fear may show up as hesitation, doubt, or a strong desire to avoid making any big changes. Even opportunities that once seemed exciting can start feeling risky because they push you further away from the old identity that once felt safe. Another common reaction is the urge to go back. People try to return to old routines, old habits, old goals because those patterns once created stability. You might attempt to restart projects that no longer inspire you, reconnect with ambitions that once felt meaningful, rebuild the same lifestyle that used to give you direction. At first, this feels comforting because familiarity reduces uncertainty. But very often, the attempt to go backward doesn't fully work anymore. The identity that once supported those patterns has already started dissolving, so the old system cannot hold the same meaning it once did. Some people respond to this discomfort by forcing productivity. Instead of slowing down and observing the transition, they try to fill every moment with action. They push themselves to work harder, produce more results, maintain constant activity. On the surface, this looks like determination or discipline, but underneath it's often an attempt to escape the uncertainty created by identity change. If they stay busy enough, they hope they won't have to face the deeper shift happening inside them. Seeking control is another strong form of resistance. When life begins feeling unpredictable, the mind tries to regain power by controlling as many variables as possible. People may start planning every detail of their future, setting strict routines, demanding clear answers before taking any step forward. The desire for control becomes stronger because control feels like safety. However, during periods of transformation, too much control can actually slow down the natural transition that needs to occur. Resistance isn't a personal failure. It's simply the mind trying to protect the identity it has known for a long time. The brain prefers familiar structures because they reduce uncertainty and make the world easier to navigate. When those structures begin breaking down, resistance is a natural reaction. But while resistance is natural, it also slows the transition. The more you try to hold on to the old identity, the longer the unstable phase tends to last. The mind keeps trying to repair something that's already changing. Instead of allowing the system to reorganize itself, resistance attempts to force stability back into place. This stage is like trying to hold water in your hands while it's flowing away. The tighter you grip, the more tension you create, but the flow continues anyway. The transformation process doesn't stop simply because the mind wants to return to the past. Eventually, something important begins to shift. You start realizing that going backward is no longer possible. The old identity cannot fully return because it no longer matches the person you're becoming. At that moment, resistance slowly begins to weaken. And when resistance weakens, the space for a true quantum leap finally begins to open. After the resistance phase begins weakening, a different kind of experience often appears. It's a quiet but powerful stage that many people don't recognize at first. This stage can be described as the gap between two versions of yourself. It's the moment where the old identity has already started fading, but the new identity hasn't yet fully taken shape. You're no longer the person you used to be, yet you're not completely sure who you're becoming. This space can feel strange because much of what once defined your life no longer feels solid. The habits that used to guide your days may lose their meaning. The goals that once gave you direction might not feel as important anymore. Even the way you describe yourself to others can begin feeling incomplete. It's as if the story you once used to explain who you are is slowly disappearing. At the same time, the new story hasn't yet been written. This creates a gap in identity, and for the human mind, gaps are uncomfortable. The brain prefers clear definitions. It wants to know who you are, what you're doing, where you're going. Where you're going. When those answers are missing, it can feel like standing on uncertain ground. There's no familiar structure holding everything together. Many people describe this period as feeling like they're living between two lives. One life belongs to the past version of themselves, containing the routines, beliefs, and roles that once felt natural. The other life belongs to a future version that hasn't fully appeared yet. That future may feel exciting in small moments, but it's still unclear and undefined. Because of this, the present moment can feel confusing. You may look around at your life and notice that parts of it no longer feel aligned with who you're becoming. At the same time, you may not yet know what should replace them. This can create a sense of floating without direction, as if you're temporarily disconnected from the structure that once organized everything. During this gap, people sometimes feel impatient. The mind wants the transition to finish quickly so that stability can return. It may push you to rush into new decisions, new identities, new commitments just to escape the uncertainty. But real transformation rarely happens that quickly. Just like in natural systems, there's often a period where the old structure must fully release before the new structure can organize itself. This stage isn't empty. Even though it may feel like nothing is happening, important internal changes are taking place. Your mind is reorganizing how it understands your goals, your values, your direction. Old assumptions are being questioned. New possibilities are slowly forming beneath the surface. It's similar to the moment before a system settles into a new configuration. The reason this gap feels uncomfortable is because it temporarily removes certainty. The identity that once made decisions easy is no longer guiding every step. Instead, you're learning to operate without the same level of predictability. This requires patience and awareness because the new version of yourself needs time to become clear. Yet this gap is also extremely important. Without it, true change wouldn't be possible. If the old identity remained fully active while the new one tried to appear, both structures would compete with each other. The mind would constantly move back and forth between them. It means continuing to move forward, even when emotional certainty is missing. During transition, your feelings may fluctuate. Some days may feel hopeful, while others may feel confusing or even frightening. If you make decisions only based on those emotional fluctuations, you may unintentionally interrupt the natural transformation cycle. True transformation requires allowing the old structure to dissolve. This is the part that many people find hardest because letting go feels like loss. But the old structure isn't being destroyed because it's bad. It's being released because it's no longer large enough to support the version of you that's emerging. Think of it like a natural system that must break down one configuration before it can build another. The dissolution of the old pattern isn't failure. It's preparation for something more complex. The quantum leap doesn't occur while the old structure is still tightly holding everything in place. It occurs when the system becomes flexible enough to reorganize itself. When you stop fighting the dissolution and instead allow the process to unfold, the system gains the freedom to move toward a higher level of complexity. The leap isn't created by force. It's enabled by openness, patience, and the willingness to let the old version of yourself complete its cycle. And sometimes, the greatest step forward isn't trying to build the new structure immediately, but simply allowing the old one to finish dissolving so that something more aligned with your future can naturally emerge. The moment of the quantum leap doesn't usually announce itself dramatically. It's not always accompanied by loud realizations or sudden external events. Instead, it often arrives quietly, almost gently, as if something inside you has finally settled into place after a long period of searching. After the phase of uncertainty, confusion, and internal reorganization, there comes a moment when something changes in the way you perceive your life. It's not that all your problems disappear at once. It's not that everything becomes perfect overnight. But suddenly, you may notice that a new direction has become clear inside your mind. The path forward may not be completely detailed, but it feels correct in a way that's difficult to explain. During this stage, energy often returns in a surprising way. The activities and ideas that align with your emerging identity begin feeling more natural and engaging. You may find yourself interested in things that once felt distant or unfamiliar. The heaviness that sometimes accompanied the transition begins to lift slowly. It's not an explosive burst of motivation, but rather a feeling that moving forward no longer requires the same level of emotional struggle. One of the most powerful indicators of the leap is that decisions start feeling obvious. During the transition gap, making choices may have felt difficult because the old identity was gone but the new one wasn't yet clear. But when the new structure begins stabilizing, your mind starts recognizing what feels right more quickly. You may notice that certain options simply don't resonate with you anymore, while others feel naturally aligned with your direction. This clarity doesn't come from forcing certainty. It emerges from the internal reorganization that's been happening quietly underneath your conscious awareness. The system inside you has been exploring possibilities, testing patterns, gradually selecting configurations that support the new version of yourself. At this point, the new structure begins to stabilize. The identity that was forming during the transition gap starts feeling more integrated. Your thoughts, motivations, and actions begin aligning more naturally with your sense of direction. Life doesn't necessarily become free of challenges, But the experience of moving through those challenges feels different because you're no longer trying to live inside an outdated version of yourself. The leap may feel less like becoming someone completely new and more like remembering something that was always trying to emerge. It can feel peaceful because the internal conflict that once existed between the old identity and the new possibility begins to fade. It's important to understand that the leap isn't the end of growth. It's the beginning of a new stable phase where the system has reorganized at a higher level of complexity. The new structure isn't meant to remain unchanged forever. Life continues to evolve, and future transitions may occur again. But after the leap, the instability that defined the transition phase usually decreases. You begin experiencing a sense of coherence between who you are, what you value, and the direction you're moving toward. The world may not change instantly, but your relationship with it often feels more integrated. The moment of the leap isn't always dramatic, but it's deeply meaningful because it represents the completion of a transformation cycle. It's the point where the system stops fighting its own reorganization and starts functioning within its new configuration. And when this moment arrives, it often feels like stepping into a version of life that wasn't forced, wasn't rushed, wasn't constructed through pressure, but allowed to emerge naturally through the process of transition. If you're going through a period in your life where things feel unclear, unstable, or even emotionally heavy, pause for a moment and consider a different perspective. Your life isn't necessarily stuck. What you may be experiencing isn't permanent failure or lost potential. It may simply be a phase where your system is preparing for transformation. What feels like stagnation from one viewpoint may actually be the quiet beginning of change from another. Sometimes what we interpret as collapse is actually the dismantling of a structure that no longer supports who we're becoming. The fear that something in your life is falling apart may be coming from the mind's natural resistance to uncertainty. But transformation often requires that old structures loosen and eventually dissolve so that new possibilities can emerge. The collapse you fear may not be the end of your progress. It may be the doorway through which expansion becomes possible. Just like natural systems in biology and physics, meaningful growth often requires a period of breakdown before a higher level of organization can appear. The process can feel uncomfortable because the mind tends to interpret instability as danger. But instability isn't always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that something is changing. Instead of asking, "When will my quantum leap happen?" a more meaningful question may be, "What am I still holding on to that's preventing it?" Because the leap isn't blocked by the absence of opportunity alone. It's often slowed by attachment to the identity, habits, or patterns that belong to the version of you that's already finishing its cycle. Transformation isn't something you must force to happen. It's something that often unfolds when you stop fighting the natural rhythm of change inside your life. The most important step isn't rushing toward the new structure, but allowing the old structure to complete its journey of dissolution. If you're standing in the uncertainty between who you were and who you're becoming, remember this: transition isn't evidence that your life is going wrong. It's evidence that your life isn't staying the same. The path forward may not always be visible. The timing of transformation may not follow your expectations, but if you can maintain just enough inner stability to move through the uncertainty without forcing the process, something new will eventually emerge. And when it does, you may look back and realize that the moment you thought your life was breaking apart was actually the moment your next version was being quietly prepared. So take a moment and ask yourself, honestly and gently, what in my life am I still protecting, even though it may be stopping my growth? Because sometimes the quantum leap isn't waiting for a new opportunity to appear. Sometimes it's waiting for you to release the version of yourself that no longer needs to stay.